So we're really excited to have Laura here today to talk to you a little bit about the industrial organizational field and what someone does in this field, what a real day in the life of an IO psychologist is like. And she'll also tell you a little bit about her path to how she came to the field, what she does every day, and really how that kind of fits into what goes on in the IO field as a whole, okay? So just to give you a little bit of background, I mentioned before that this is part of a series called A Day in the Life, and it's a day in the life of IO psychologists, developmental psychologists, all kinds of different psychologists, so that students and prospective students can really get a feel for what it's like to take on these roles in all of these different areas. And IO psychology is particularly exciting for us at SPS because we have an undergraduate program, a bachelor's program here that's fully online, and one of the 3 tracks in the program is an IO track. So we also have a psychopathology track for those people interested in clinical psych. We have a track in developmental psych for people who are interested in sort of the broad scheme of people's growth from infancy through adulthood and aging. And then we have this track. We also have a graduate program that we just launched this spring. It's a fully online master's program, and we are the only program of our kind in the CUNY system. So that program has only 2 tracks. One of those tracks is developmental psychology, and then the other is IO. So this series, again, is really part of a series geared toward our master's students, but we also opened it up to all of you and other people who might be interested in hearing about what this field's like, okay? So I'll read you Laura's bio, even though you've probably already read it yourself, which is why you're here. Laura Sywulak is a senior analyst of people analytics and engagement at JetBlue, where she runs the employee engagement survey and action planning program. She began her career consulting, partnering with companies like Tiffany & Company, Facebook, and Semantic to measure workers' experiences throughout the employee life cycle. Laura is currently earning her PhD. She's in the final home stretch in IO psychology at Baruch and the CUNY Graduate Center. And her dissertation research is focused on the effects of having influence over others at work. Laura holds an MS and an MPhil in IO psychology from CUNY, and she has a BS degree in psychology from Temple University. So I'll now turn it over to Laura, who's going to tell us all about her really interesting job that she has at JetBlue. So welcome. And I should also mention that Laura teaches in our undergraduate program in psychology here. So we're very lucky to have her. And she will also be teaching courses in our graduate program once the IO track courses start to roll out. Okay.
Thank you, Carla. Hi guys, it's very weird to have a microphone. It'll take me a second to get used to it. I'm really excited to be here, especially because I love IO psychology, so I'm always happy to kind of talk about it and why I love it so much. And there really are so many directions that you can go in IO, which is a big reason why I kind of went that path. And I'm now kind of enjoying the fruits of that opportunity, so I'm happy to kind of walk you through that. So I'm going to walk you through kind of how things have gone for me from when I was where you are, which is an undergrad or just graduated or close to graduating, kind of deciding what you want to do next, up to kind of where I am today. So this is kind of my rough career timeline. So I started way at the beginning. I'm 31 years old, so just to give you a sense of kind of how long things take, I would never have imagined that at 31 I would be talking about my career to other people. So it's pretty exciting, and you grow up, I think, faster than you expect to. But my career in IO really began in undergraduate. Temple University was where I went, from Philadelphia area. Big fan, Eagles fans in here? No, all right. Well, ever since I started grad school, I haven't been able to follow football, so I don't even know if they're good anymore. But yeah, I went to Temple. I graduated in 2007 with a degree in psychology. So Temple didn't have an IO Psych program back then. IO Psych, I think, was still not really a true field in psychology yet. It was kind of developing, so I don't think that most colleges had majors in it, so it's pretty cool to me that you guys have a track for it. I think that says a lot about how the field has grown in the past 10 years. We did have one IO psychology professor. He taught 2 IO psychology courses, intro and a performance management course, I think. I took both, and then I decided to start doing research with him because I just thought IO was pretty cool. I actually at that time was also doing research in developmental psych because I thought that that was also pretty cool, and I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. So I was kind of riding both fields for a little bit. And when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to continue going to school. I just didn't know if I wanted to do master's, PhD. Did I want to specialize in IO or just, do something more generalized in psychology or maybe biology? And so ultimately, I decided to get a job. And I like to tell this story because I think kind of the way I've gotten all my jobs has not been the way that you maybe necessarily are taught. I've truly learned the power of networking and how random people in your life can really bring opportunities that you never expected. So in college, I worked in a coffee shop. I was a barista. It was a really fun job. And as I was nearing graduation, I was about to leave to study abroad. And when I came back, I wasn't sure I was going to graduate. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just, was chatting with a customer one morning and saying, I really like doing research. I've been doing it in my undergraduate program. I think it's cool. I think I might want to go get a PhD, but I'm not sure. And he said, oh, that's interesting because in a few months when you get back from studying abroad, I'm going to have a position open. It's a full-time research position for exactly people like you who think they want to go into a PhD program but aren't sure and want to test out what a life of research is like, not make any money, and work really long hours. So it's just like grad school. It was. And so I did that for 2 years and I loved it. I got to write grants, I got to do research, write up articles, go to conferences, and I really loved every second of it, but it was very hard work. So I ultimately applied to IO PhD programs, finally made that commitment. I still sometimes think, oh, maybe I should be a developmental psych, maybe I should be a clinical psychologist, but no, IO is really great, and I think there's a lot of breadth in the field if you're not sure what you want to do. I got it down to 2 schools, Baruch College, also part of the CUNY network, and a school in Canada, about an hour outside Toronto in a very sleepy town called Waterloo. So I wasn't sure. Both were great programs, great opportunities, and ultimately I decided that I wanted to live my grad school life in New York City and not celebrating the annual Maple Syrup Festival, which is what they were prepping for when I visited. So the trade-off there was money, certainly. I mean, living in a small town in Canada, you can certainly live off of grad school stipends. Not so the case in New York City. That's kind of been the trade-off for me. I can't say whether I regret it or not. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone to Canada instead. But I will say I have fairly sizable student loans, which isn't necessarily typical for graduate school. But I like to talk about that because ultimately I essentially gave up the rest of my 20s to graduate school. And it was much more fun having my 20s be in New York City than in Canada. So right now I'm actually in the 7th year of my program. I'm finishing up my dissertation. So it'll probably be about another year. And I don't know if you guys have looked at the stats on PhD programs, but 7 years is the average for a psych PhD. So I'm kind of right on target there. And it is, hard work, a big decision, a big commitment. So I ultimately am really glad I took those 2 years to make sure that this is what I wanted to do. So I moved to New York, started grad school. Everything was great. I was a full-time student again. After working full-time, it was great to have, that easy schedule. You get to kind of work whenever you want, doing the things that you care the most about. Then in my 5th year, I decided I was tired of living off $18,000 a year in New York, and so I started looking for internships. And while at this point I was freelancing for the consulting firm that I ultimately started working for, Sirota Consulting. Has anyone heard of it? It's out in Westchester. It's a pretty small group, but a lot of really cool clients. So I started there doing being a coding analyst. So they would just send me thousands upon thousands of comments from their employee surveys. So that was how I got my start in doing what I do now, was really just reading all these comments about different companies, coding them, theming them, and then doing analysis to kind of give organizations an idea of what their employees were saying about them in their surveys. And it was really fun. I remember surveying for TD Bank. I did some coding for Tiffany and Company, who would later become my client. It's definitely a fun way to learn about organizations. So when I started looking for internships, Sirota was one of the first places I looked, but they weren't hiring. And so I spent probably about 9 months looking. And I don't know if anyone here has run into this, but I definitely ran into the, oh, you want an internship here? Well, but why don't you have any job experience? Can't you give me some? So ultimately, the way I got into Sirota was asking them again and again, applying to every position they put out, and then ultimately it was two of my friends from my graduate program who worked there put in a good word for me, and then I got to work there. So that was when I became an intern. It was definitely a hard road. I was surprised at how hard it was to kind of break into the business, but it was worth it. Sirota was probably the best developmental experience I could have gotten. And at that time, it was my dream job. I wanted to be a consultant. I wanted to be cool and have clients and travel a lot and work all the time. And I got to do just that. And I got to work with some great clients, like Carla mentioned, Tiffany and Company. It's one of my personal favorites. They're a really great company. Did some work for Facebook, Symantec, some really, really interesting organizations that do a lot in terms of collecting data from their employees. And I learned everything about surveying employees, collecting data from them, how to do it, when to do it, what to do with the data once you have it, how to translate kind of these confusing metrics and statistics into something that leaders can digest and act upon. And then ultimately, I decided after a couple years doing the consulting gig that school maybe wasn't progressing at the pace that I wanted to. I really wanted to graduate. I also decided, at the ripe old age of 29 that I wanted better work-life balance. And I didn't want to travel as much, and I didn't want to work as many hours. So I started looking. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I think ultimately I had pictured myself, transitioning into another consulting role. But the job at JetBlue came across my desk, and I wasn't that interested in going internal in HR. So there's kind of some big differences between working what we call externally, so as a consultant that goes into an organization, does some work for hire and then leaves, versus being someone who's actually housed within the organization doing similar work. Consulting is fast, it pays well, it's very efficient because it has to be. You're trying to make profit. You get to work with a wide variety of clients who have a wide variety of problems. So it's pretty interesting. You never get bored. Internally, slower pace, which can be good or bad depending on what you're trying to get done. And you don't get to just leave when the project's over. You have to stay and deal with whatever's happening, which for me, when I first thought about going into an internal role, was something that I thought I would hate. So I actually, to be honest, don't know why I applied for the JetBlue job. But when I met the hiring manager, I fell in love with her. She was great, and I decided I really want to work for this woman, and JetBlue is a great place for IO psychologists to work. It's a great company in general. They treat their employees really well. Let's give it a shot. And it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. So I've been working at JetBlue since July of 2015, so it's only been not even a year. And it's been quite a wild ride. So I'll give you a little bit of background about kind of how I sit within the organization. So I'm in the people department, which is our HR department, and specifically I work in talent. And this is where a lot of IO psychologists are housed now when you work internally within an organization, is in kind of the talent team, both acquiring and then nurturing talent within the organization. So I'll talk a little bit about JetBlue's culture, because that was the thing that ultimately, besides the great hiring manager, made me want to work for this company. So JetBlue's ultimate mission, I don't know if you guys have heard this, is to inspire humanity. Has anyone ever flown JetBlue? Cool. Would you guys say it's a fairly different experience compared to other airlines? You can say no. Yeah, what's different about it? What do you like? Speak up.
They have better planes, I think.
Better planes. Okay, we are very proud of our fleet.
It's a lot more roomier, and also they have like a lot more options, like televisions, and then they give snacks, so they care.
Exactly. We care very much about our customer experience, and it's a huge part of our brand and how we've distinguished ourselves, not just as a lower cost carrier, because we actually don't really consider ourselves that, but what we really do care about is that, you know, we have a differentiated product, that we have the experience on JetBlue is unique, and it's different than what you get anywhere else, and that's something that we continue to foster and grow. And then in terms of how that translates to crew members, in the same way that we want our customers to have a really great experience, JetBlue leadership cares just as much about their employees. We call them crew members. So the airline industry is really interesting. You kind of have almost like mini organizations within one. So we have 6 major work groups at JetBlue. We have our pilots. We have our flight attendants. We have our airport's operation members. Those are the people that you see at the ticket counter, at the gate. It also includes the ground operations, which are the people that check your bags up into the plane. We have our customer support group, which is basically anytime you call JetBlue, that's who you're talking to, is a customer service agent located out in Salt Lake City, most likely. They also work from home, so they're also most likely in their pajamas, if you find that interesting. And then our technical operations group, they're the people that fix the planes. They also do a lot of other things, but I'm still learning their jobs. They're very complex. And then we have support services, which is what we call our corporate crew members. Because the idea at JetBlue is that we're really there to support the operation. We're not sitting in our, you know, ivory tower in corporate headquarters just giving out directives that affect crew members' lives, and we really don't see it. Our job is really to support them. And so, you know, one way, and I'll talk about this on the next slide as well, is that if there's ever what we call an irregular operation, an IROP, and JFK needs help, there's a snowstorm, all the flights got canceled, it's absolutely expected that I, as a corporate crew member, will drop what I'm doing, go out to JFK, and help them deal with the many angry customers that they are now dealing with. So it really is a culture that, you know, there's nothing special about us. We are there to support the operation, and we all have the same goal regardless of which work group we sit in. The other thing that I love about JetBlue, and this is throughout the organization, but certainly within the talent team where we have leadership development housed, this piece right here, do the right thing. Every competency that we care about, every behavior that we track at JetBlue, ultimately, when it comes down to making a decision as a crew member or a crew leader, do the right thing is the thing we tell people to keep in mind. We like to empower our crew members to serve customers, to serve other crew members in the way that they see fit. And that's really about hiring the right talent, right? We hire people that know what we're doing, and then we get out of their way so that they can do a good job. And ultimately, you know, we trust them to do what they have to do as long as they're keeping in mind that they believe it's the right thing to do. So these are the kind of ideas that really attracted me to JetBlue and made me want to be not just a crew member, but also somebody who openly, you know, spends her job contributing to strengthening this culture. All right, so within the talent team, we have a little saying, we hire, inspire, and grow. So we try to hire the right people. That's our talent acquisition department. There's our recruiters who are extremely talented at finding really great people and making them want to work for JetBlue, even though I will tell you JetBlue doesn't pay great. But it doesn't matter because they make the whole hiring experience so wonderful, and by the end of it you're just like, please just let me work here, I'll be an intern, I don't care. And we do. I mean, we had a military vet who was about 45 years old, started JetBlue as an intern just to get his in. My boss started, who's now a director, started as a coordinator, which is a couple levels lower than even my position. So people really are, you know, JetBlue has created not only a brand for customers, but for applicants as well. People really want to work at JetBlue. They don't necessarily care if it's their dream job yet. They just want to get into the organization, show that they can contribute. And JetBlue does recognize that, and you will go far if that's, you know, what you can prove yourself once you get here. So I'm not part of the hiring part. I sit in organizational effectiveness. Oh, I don't have it here. And then the third part is talent management, which is like performance management, goal setting. So I sit in organizational effectiveness, which is mostly training and development, leadership development. And then my team, the engagement team, is the analytics arm of organizational effectiveness. And so specifically what I do in my job is, has anyone here ever heard of an employee engagement survey or taken one? A couple of people. What kinds of questions do they ask you on those? Do you remember? Ask questions about your manager, other employees, your team, how you work with them. Good. Do you have other things? Excellent. Yeah, we do it the same across many organizations. Yeah, so the major things we're interested in are, do you feel engaged in your job? Is there some energy around it, some passion, some dedication? And then do you intend to stay with the organization? We care about that as well. And in order to predict those things, we measure various aspects of your work experience. Like you said, your perceptions of your manager. That's probably the number one reason people leave their jobs, is because they are leaving their manager. Teamwork, perceptions of senior leadership. Are they taking the company in the right direction? Diversity and inclusion is one of the newer hot topics. Do you feel like JetBlue values diversity? And do you feel like, as a crew member with all of your own identities, that you can be yourself at work? So those are just a smattering of the things that we measure perceptions of within the organization. And we do it a couple ways at JetBlue. JetBlue is very, very measurement oriented, hence why they have so many IO psychologists on staff. It's a pretty rigorous program, and that's just to measure engagement. We measure a lot of other things with equal rigor throughout the organization. And so we do it in two ways. We have our big annual survey. So all of October we call it Speak Up Month. That's the name of our survey, is the Speak Up Survey. We want all of our crew members to speak up and tell us what's going right and what could maybe use some improvement at JetBlue. And our small little team, small but mighty, there's only 3 of us. We travel around the network and we have, crew members take the survey. So if you think about a pilot or somebody who works the ticket counter or somebody who throws bags, they're not really sitting in front of a computer all day, so emailing them a survey link isn't the most effective means to get them to participate. So we go with iPads and we say, hey, ask me questions about the survey, and if you want to take it right here, you can, and we let them do that. So it's a fun whirlwind of a month. I did it just a few months after joining, and it was fun. I mean, I stayed on the beach in San Juan. We have a base in Long Beach. I got to go to Fort Lauderdale, so it wasn't too bad of a gig. And so that's October. We spend November and December getting all the numbers out to leaders across the organization. We meet with every work group to talk about their results and what they need to work on for the year, and then we help them develop an action plan. Have you guys heard of an action plan before? I don't want to use too much business speak. So ultimately, we use statistics and our expertise to determine what are the biggest areas of opportunities for a given work group. So maybe for one work group, their scores on teamwork aren't so hot, and we really want them to work on that throughout the year to try and drive those numbers up. We work with them to create an action plan for their group, which is just specific items they're going to do to enhance teamwork. So maybe they do some kind of team bonding activity. So one hot activity last summer was escape the room. Has anyone ever done that? A lot of JetBluers have done Escape the Room now. It was a huge team building initiative that a lot of groups engaged in, and it was, we got good reviews. People were pretty happy about it, and we did see some nice improvements in numbers. So once we set that with them in the beginning of the year, they start executing on it, ideally now. And we're actually in the middle of this right now, we actually collect pulse data as well, what we call a pulse survey. It's like an abbreviated version of the survey that we give in October. And we give this survey to a random sample of the population every month, and then each quarter we report out on it. So it gives leaders an update on what they're doing right, whether their action plan is working, whether anything in the work group has changed. So even small things like a manager leaving or arriving, having a beloved team member resign from the organization, being merged with another team, Even just having a process change. So our flight attendants right now are going through a lot of process changes. They're learning a lot more about hospitality and how to enhance your experience as a customer even more. But it's stressful for them. You know, all of a sudden, it's people who, you know, really were doing a bang-up job as a flight attendant are having to learn kind of a whole new skill set. So that's, you know, an example of one work group we're keeping an eye on this year to make sure that their sentiment levels don't drop. Because if they do, we want to intervene with that. We don't want this added, what we consider a bonus for our customers, and ultimately we hope for our in-flight crew members as well, to become something that's so stressful that it's starting to affect their day-to-day work experience. So these are the kinds of things I think about in my job all the time. It's complex. You have to have an eye on what's going on throughout the organization. I'm quickly learning JetBlue and the aviation industry all at once, and it's complex but exciting. And oh, I'm sorry, I kind of skipped my slide here. So these are kind of the major buckets. I think I've touched on all of these kind of in a roundabout way so far. So the big part, administering the survey. So like I said, in October when we go around, we're having people actually take it. The survey's online, open for people to respond to it. And then we actually technically administer January through September as well with the pulse. Again, reporting, so that happens in November and December and then at the end of each quarter. So we spend a lot of time in reporting. And then action planning. And again, this is something we kind of kick off the action planning year in January, but it's something that we, you know, have to keep an eye on all year long. So I don't know if any of you guys saw the headline that we were bidding, JetBlue was bidding for Virgin Airlines, but we lost out to Alaska. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll be honest. I love JetBlue and I want them to grow however they need to grow, and that's not my arena. But I can tell you from an organizational effective standpoint, from a crew member engagement standpoint, that was something that had me a little bit worried that if we acquired Virgin, we would, you know, mergers are probably one of the trickiest organizational change initiatives that a company can go through. So that would have definitely made my job very tricky, especially because well, there's a lot of aspects of Virgin that, you know, the culture isn't so similar to JetBlue. So again, these are the kinds of things I have to think about on my job all the time. It's kind of strange to think that current events impact my job in such a direct way, but they can, and especially in the airline industry where things can change so quickly. All it takes is one major security threat for the federal government to change some rule that completely changes the way that our crew members have to do their jobs. And it's up to us to make sure that we're supporting them so that they can continue to do what they do well without having to worry about, you know, kind of the icky behind the scenes stuff. We try to take care of that as much as we can for them. I also tried to put a couple things around other skills that either I needed to have for this job or have quickly begun to develop in this job. So business acumen is a huge one. Again, like I said, I have to keep an eye on what's going on in the whole organization. And so even things like this potential merger could have a major impact for my own day-to-day and what I need to focus on when I'm trying to support crew members. Mentoring is another piece of my job. So we have an analyst on the team as well as an intern, and I'm expected to, you know, develop them, which is fun and intimidating. But it's great. It's something I'd never had to really do before. I was always used to being the mentee. So being thrust into the role of mentor has been definitely a learning experience. But I enjoy it more than I thought that I would. Networking, I hope I've already kind of expressed the importance of networking to you. It's how I've gotten every position I've had. And even within the organization, I have to partner with a lot of other departments in order to make the survey work and make the action planning program work. So one of my closest partnerships is with corporate communications. What we have found at JetBlue is that you can have the shiniest, best action plan in the world, but if you don't tell your crew members that you're doing it because they spoke up on the survey, they actually aren't that happy about it. So the communication piece is key. And in the survey world, we say, if you're not going to do anything with the feedback, you're actually better off just not asking at all. And you might feel this personally. If someone asks you your opinion and then completely does not consider it in their decision making, it's a little bit offensive, right? Like, well, why did you ask me in the first place? And so this is a reality we face every day when we do survey work, making sure that once the crew member gives us feedback, they've done their part of the deal. They have committed to giving honest, candid feedback to us, and it's now our obligation and responsibility to act on that in a positive way. We're not saying that we're going to make everything better. We're not saying we're going to be able to give you the espresso machine that you asked for in the Speak Up survey, but we will make an absolute honest effort to make things better for you. You know, and that's something that's difficult, especially in something like the airline industry where all it takes is a few snowstorms and JFK Airport is not focusing on action planning for several weeks, and we wouldn't expect them to. Supporting the operation, again, I mean, there's actually a program, like I said, if there's an IROP, we're expected to drop what we're doing at the support centers and go help the operation. But there's other ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a regular operation. So the holidays, the summer's coming up, they're constantly asking for volunteers. Please come help us. I've only done it once. I did it at Christmas time. Be nice to people that work at airports. People absolutely panic when they come into the airport. It's crazy how they act. They turn into monsters. It gave me a whole new appreciation for what our crew members are dealing with every day, trying to give our customers a top-notch experience amidst some of probably the worst human behavior I've ever seen. Be nice to your flight attendants. They deal with some crazy stuff. Pilots are, you know, whatever, they're fun. They hold up pretty well. They make good money. And then personal development. And again, this is something that is challenging at JetBlue, but I think I like their approach. They consider your personal development 100% your responsibility. So not to say no one's going to support you or mentor you or guide you on what to do, but if you want to develop, if I want to develop my business acumen, it's on me to figure out how to do that and then ask the right people to support me. If I want to do, you know, a challenging analytics project, my boss can't help me with that. She doesn't know how to do analytics. So it's up to me to go find a partner or a teacher or some other support mechanism so that I can develop that within myself. My boss will give me the time and the space and any support that she can to help me with that. But ultimately, if I want to get better, it's on me to drive that process. And that's something that we definitely have trouble with our crew members, especially working in the operation. If you are focused on serving customers, you're not necessarily thinking about the next stage of your development or even your career. And so we constantly have to kind of remind them that that's something that they should be on their mind and actively working towards. Because it can take time. It can take a year to develop the skills you need to get the job that you want, and that's okay. But you need to make sure that you know what you're doing. All right. I've been talking for a long time. What questions do you guys have? Anything? Yeah, so the people online can hear your brilliant questions.
So I'll play the role of the host, and if you want to just raise your hands, anyone in the room that has a question, you'll speak into the mic so that people that are not here can hear you.
I just had a question about networking. Can you kind of go over that one more time? You said it's important to network with, I didn't catch what you said exactly, but then you went into, you have to take feedback from, were you talking about employees that work for JetBlue or your staff, the people you work closer to? Or
So I talked more about it from the perspective of, you know, hearing crew member feedback, but no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think if you want to develop as a person, a human being, not just an employee, listening to what people around you are saying and kind of picking out the common themes are important. You know, and I think, you know, having the support systems in place, I consider myself pretty, I think too much about what's going on in my own head. You know, some people aren't kind of that introspective, and so you need to ask people and see what their feedback is. Feedback's a hard thing at JetBlue. JetBlue is a very nice culture. We don't like to tell people no. We don't like to say bad news. And so feedback is a tough thing to give at JetBlue. There's a lot of people that would shy away from it rather than give critical feedback. But that said, it's still important. In terms of networking in general, I don't think I learned the importance of networking internally until I moved into JetBlue. And like I said, I think the nature of my job is I have to partner with so many departments like CorpCom, or there's other departments I have to partner with to be able to do my job in the most effective way possible. And that's been tough. So one challenge that I faced at JetBlue is that my manager, the one that I loved, ended up leaving about a month after I got there. So not only was I trying to find my way, but I was kind of doing it on my own. Which is fine. Sometimes you learn the best in the deep end. But beyond that, I think, part of what helped me with that was that I had focused so much on my networking skills starting in grad school. So if you ever do go to grad school, you'll probably hear professors say, your career doesn't start when you get your first job, it starts when you start grad school. And that is very true. I can tell you, I don't think any of my faculty have ever given me a recommendation or helped me get a job. It's always been other graduate students, not necessarily ones that were older than me either. So you never know. Networking with your peers is important. Even if you don't think they have anything to offer you now, hopefully, through their education at SPS, they will become very talented, extremely well-functioning, and successful adults. And so those people, that you are in classes with now that maybe aren't even working could ultimately be the person that gets you a job at, your dream company 5 years down the line. You never know what's going to happen. And I even think as I kind of look at the people that I started as a grad student with and all the amazing things that people have done, I am blown away. If you'd asked me 5 years ago what my life would look like, what some of my colleagues' lives would look like, I don't think I ever could have guessed that we would be doing the things that we're doing. We wouldn't have really dreamed of that level of success. So, it's definitely possible. I think it can happen a lot faster than you want, but I think the more that you drive that process, and I think networking is a huge piece of that, the faster it will happen and the easier it will happen for you. And so one thing I tell people, I teach a class on interviewing techniques. We cover, the employment interview. One of the things I tell people is if you are looking for a job, everyone you know should know that you're looking for a job and what you're looking for a job in. My mom is a database manager in a school district. When I was looking for an internship, one of her colleagues that she rarely interacts with was best friends with the sister of an extremely successful IO psychologist in New York City who did have her own firm, now works at a different firm. She got me an interview with that person. My mom did. It was actually a little bit embarrassing. But like I said, you never know who knows who has influence with who. So I think, your classmates and your colleagues at SPS are kind of your first network, and the more that you can strengthen that, you never know what can come from it in the future.
Would you mind speaking a little bit about the trajectory of school and what sort of jobs you could acquire while you're in school after you finish? Like, what's the timeline in that, and how long does it take, and what are you kind of looking at from a prospective student?
Yeah, that's a great question. For master's programs, it works a little bit differently. Obviously, those programs are much more condensed. So typically around 2 years, a lot of them cater to people who are already working, and so they have classes in the evening. A PhD is not like that. A PhD, I didn't start working part-time until I was 5 years in, and my program still was like, we can't believe you're working. You're still in school. You should be focused on nothing but school. And they're not wrong, because it is hard to work and go to school at the same time. So for me, I didn't start working until after I was in coursework. I couldn't imagine that. I did odd jobs for extra money. So I always taught extra courses. I did the coding job for Sirota because I could do that from home. I'm trying to think what other odd jobs I had. I mean, I would take on small contract projects. Like consulting firms will sometimes reach out to our faculty who will pass on, small pieces of consulting work that are, fairly basic. So I'd make money like that. But I didn't start working full-time until, like I said, I was done coursework, and actually I had passed my comprehensive exams, which, in the course of a PhD, you have your coursework, you have your thesis, you have your comprehensive exams, and you have your dissertation. That's kind of the checklist. So I kind of checked off everything except the dissertation before I started working, thinking that would be fine. It's been much more difficult than I imagined, and I understand now why my faculty advised us so strongly not to work until you at least have proposed your dissertation and are almost done, because it's a lot to do. But I don't know if that fully answered your question. Yeah, so I think the only jobs that are kind of out of reach to a master's student are research-based jobs. So even in what I do, so the analyst on my team has a master's program. He actually recently decided to go back for his PhD at Hofstra, but he didn't have to for his job. He just, he wanted to. So there are people with master's degrees. I would say the PhD gives you, a little bit more flexibility. You learn a lot more about analytics. I think getting that research training teaches you to think in a critical way that is very helpful to organizations. So I don't just, look at a problem and think about possible solutions. I, try to phrase the problem as a hypothesis, and then I think about what data I can use to inform decision-making about that, make recommendations based on as much data as I can get, and then use that. And at JetBlue, it's a very database organization. That's the way to do it. Not all organizations are like that. But the PhD really gives you the credibility when you're doing something like that. But, I think if you wanted to go into a job like JetBlue, you certainly could do it with a master's degree. The jobs that you would need a PhD for, obviously, if you wanted to become a professor. So you wanted to, go to university, get on a tenure track, supervise students, teach, do your own research, have your own lab. You need a PhD to do that. There's also kind of more applied research jobs at certain research centers. So there's the Center for Creative Leadership in New Jersey. It has a couple headquarters around the world. They obviously study leadership and leadership development. They have a consulting arm, they have a research arm, but most of the people that work there are PhDs because they are doing kind of more researchy projects. Pew Research Center, I don't know, that's another popular one. They do a lot of policy research. So they essentially use data to inform policy decisions, at various levels. And you probably would need a PhD to do that as well. Again, it's heavy on analytics, heavy on using data to make recommendations and garner insight. And that's really what getting your PhD is, learning how to do.
So I'm going to take a quick break to take a question from online, and then we'll switch back to in-the-room questions.
Are internships the common, or are there other ways to go about it?
Yes, that's a great question. Like I said, I gained professional experience however I could. So I just constantly asked for work. And especially once I decided I wanted to go the applied route, then, the work experience piece came in. I needed something to talk about that I had done with organizations. So the coding job that I had, where I was just coding comments, like I said, keeping in touch with faculty whenever they had small, either some of our faculty do their own consulting and would sometimes, throw a little work to students. But they also had contacts in the industry that, know that there's they have a friend who's a faculty member at Baruch who has, a wealth of eager, smart PhD students who need money at their disposal. So those things do come through. But I would say it's hard. I mean, it's hard, first of all, to work and go to school, which many of you probably know that struggle. So it's, it's difficult to juggle so many things. And it was hard. I mean, looking back, it's been rough in terms of how much I've had to do to kind of set myself up to get where I am now. But I will say, I think it's been worth what I've gone through.
Questions in the room?
My question is about the pilots, right? Do they have a very specific psychological battery they would go through? And if so, before the IO was instituted in in many companies, now I guess that would be you guys' job, right?
Yeah. So that sits on a slightly different team, although they do sit near me, and I'm fascinated by the work that they do. So that's actually some of the most exciting stuff JetBlue is doing right now is designing assessments for pilots and other work groups as well. I don't know the exact details of what you have to go through to be a pilot. You do a personality test. You do have to do a flight simulation. It's like a video game. I played it. I accidentally was flying upside down. I didn't even know until I went to go down and saw the sky, and I was like, oh, sorry, passengers. Yeah. Yeah. No, we don't. As far as I know, we do not test for any kind of sociopathy or mental illness. Yeah. But That's a good point.
So I have an online question, which is, it seems that the Speak Up survey results really focus your attention. Do you feel that there is a human/emotional component potentially lost from this perspective? So the results/statistics drive a physical interaction is what they're asking.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when I was a consultant, and I think I was trained well to go internally because of the way that Sirota trained me as a consultant, is that you're not just going in like you're the expert and you're just going to tell them what to do and they'll do it and then you'll leave. And that's sometimes the situation. It's not a bad gig to just have people do what you say. But we, at Sirota, I was taught to look at it much more as a partnership. So I have the expertise around survey measurement, around how to interpret data, to run analytics, where to dig deeper. But ultimately, the client is the one who's the expert on their own culture and the context in which that data lies. And so it really was a joint effort to, understand the results, but using the expertise of the HRBP, or sometimes we worked with another IO psychologist internally to understand what that data meant for that company at that point in time, because things can change very quickly no matter what industry or company you're in. And so I've kind of tried to take that same attitude into my job at JetBlue, especially, with the airline industry being so complex, and me not knowing anything about it till I got there. It's really been a big learning experience for me. So I've done a lot of shadowing, going around the network, trying to understand different people's jobs, but also in conversations with leaders. So I met with almost every VP in the company to discuss the results with them. So one of the first things I ask is, okay, well, how have things been going since October? Anything major happen in the work group that would basically make these numbers not really relevant anymore? And then we have a discussion around that. And we talk about what's been going on in the group for the last year, what does the year ahead look like, and how do these results fit into that context? And then we together make a decision around what the focus areas should be. So we make suggestions based on stats and our expertise, but ultimately it's a decision by the leader of the work group around what that work group needs to focus on once they, take a look at the results.
Any questions in the room?
So can you explain the difference between your job position as an analyst and, let's say, an HR and management concentration, or I think is coaching and training? I was looking on the school site. There was coaching and training concentration and HR and management. So what's the difference between the two? Because I'm still trying to figure out which route I want to go, if I want to do HR and management or coaching and training.
That's a great question. I am not familiar with what the HR management coursework entails. I would say, we have managers in HR. There's supposed to be a manager for our team. That position's vacant for the moment. And then we have directors and a VP of talent, a couple of VPs within the people department. In terms of the difference between training and coaching, though, I can definitely talk to you about that. So training is, you guys have all probably been through some kind of training. And so organizations to a greater or lesser extent invest in training. Within JetBlue, the biggest investment we've made is leadership development. So JetBlue's leadership model is one of servant leadership. Have you guys heard that term before? So ultimately, it's the idea of having a service attitude. So you're not there to be, the big honcho that, in the corner office that makes a ton of money. You're there because you are so service-oriented that you feel inspired to lead others to be similarly service-oriented. So it's this idea that you're not just a leader. You don't just become a manager and tell people what to do. You're still a significant contributor to the business, with the added responsibility of managing, coaching, and developing others underneath you. So it's tough. It's not easy to be a manager at JetBlue, to be a leader at JetBlue. The coaching piece typically happens at higher executive levels. So once you become the kind of leader where you're not sitting around poking around in spreadsheets or creating reports or making something or serving customers. You are directing strategy. You are leading other members of the organization in their work towards shared goals and a shared vision. And that's not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of soft skills that most people don't naturally have. So one reason why I don't think I would ever, be a great leader is because I have a temper. I don't like inefficiency, and if you are wasting my time, I don't want to work with you anymore. As a leader, you can't do that. As a leader, it becomes your responsibility to understand why this person is working inefficiently. How can you help them to work more efficiently? What can you do to support them doing their work, regardless of how much work that is on your part. So coaching is really around those softer skills, how to talk to people, how to give feedback, for example, in a way that doesn't make people defensive. Because as soon as we get defensive, we're not listening anymore, right? So we're not hearing what people are telling us. It's how do you speak to a group, right? How do you speak in a way that creates impact? How do you influence others? So once you become a leader, we have our vice president of talent. She used to do a lot of things to kind of make the talent department work, and she depends on the finance team and the operations team and the customer experience team and those leaders to work with her in order to make her job, to make her a functioning leader within JetBlue. So coaching is more around those skills. It's something that you're typically exposed to once you get into higher levels of leadership. It's kind of some one-on-one coaching. I mean, it could be someone with an IO psychology background. You certainly don't need that to go into executive coaching. I think there's a couple different routes you can take. HR management might be one. I think it'd be worth looking into or talking to somebody about. But yeah, coaching definitely falls under the umbrella of like training, learning, and development.
So Laura, someone online would like to know, and it's sort of piggybacking what you were talking about right now, but what is the best way to go about getting a position in a recruiter or talent acquisition part of IO? Okay, so the recruiting job, I think, has become, in my view, a lot more complex than it used to be. Recruiters, at least I remember when I even first started job searching, only a few years ago, they seemed like not necessarily, it wasn't the most skilled job. I can say at JetBlue that's not the way it is. We have recruiters who not only have great networks where they know where to reach out, who to reach out to find and source good candidates, but they also care greatly about curating the applicant experience. So from the second you send an application to JetBlue, we care very deeply about what your experience is from there on, and we want it to be good. We want it to be excellent. And so that's really, I think, where our recruiters are great in that they have kind of eyes on that throughout the entire experience. They're constantly thinking about what you're experiencing as an applicant, and is it good or bad, and just how does that reflect on JetBlue. And then making sure that they're kind of gatekeepers to the organization, right? They don't want to let in people that are going to ruin the culture. They want to bring in people who are going to continue to reinforce and support it. So I think having skills around that is important. I don't believe any of the recruiters that I work with at JetBlue have PhDs, but I know some of them do have master's degrees, but I don't think by any means that that's necessary. In terms of getting one of those jobs, I don't think you necessarily need experience to break into that. I could be wrong. But I think that's something that if you show kind of attention to those aspects, this idea that your network matters, that the applicant experience matters, then you're already on the right track to becoming a good recruiter. I have another online question. Can we go here, Darian? Great, yeah, thank you. The other question was, has the use of structured interviews played a role in your experience, and has that been a positive or negative experience?
Yeah, so behavioral-based interviews, I probably have done been asked at least a few questions like that in every job I've ever applied for and interviewed for, which is much more than I've had. Yeah, they're absolutely, it's a better, structured interviews are better than unstructured. Structured interviews aren't even really that predictive of job performance, but they do a much better job than when you kind of just pull somebody in a room and try to get a feel for them. The other problem with unstructured interviews is that our personal biases come in. So any type of race-related issues, sex-related issues, our views on LGBT, those things all influence the way that we interact with someone once we put them into whatever boxes we think that they belong in. in, which often is wrong, right? So definitely, you know, structured interviews are, you know, what's happening, behaviorally based questions. So asking you, tell me about a time when. Those are the questions you need to be prepared for. And unfortunately, when you don't have a lot of job experience, you're at a disadvantage on those. So you have to speak more in hypotheticals. And, you know, the more specific you can be, I would say the better. But, you know, understand that that is a limitation. But yeah, those are definitely the way that interviewers are going.
So any questions in the room?
So what would you say are the main differences between human resources management and IO psychologists?
So again, I'm sorry I can't speak too much to human resources management. IO psychology, I think, is, you know, it's looking at human behavior and trying to understand it to ultimately predict it. And we just focus on the population of workers. So I can understand why you yelled at somebody at work because I understand it in the context of how work stress influences your behavior and what might be causing you work stress because of your particular role or tenure or the industry that you work in. I cannot tell you that you yelled at somebody because you have a bad relationship with your mom and growing up you lived in a household where there was a lot of arguing. Those are the things I don't know. That's the type of question you'd have to ask a clinical psychologist. So like I said, where I think IO psychology has a real advantage over kind of any other more business-oriented major or track is that it's this deep understanding of human behavior and what's driving it. And, I'm being able to speak to that, both in terms of data and just generally, trying to explain why people do the things they do and feel the way that they feel and think the way that they think.
Do you ever have any input in, like, for example, developing strategies for developing business or marketing? Because you said, how do we influence people? So companies use a lot of psychology to attract, business to their brands.
Yeah, absolutely. So JetBlue's brand is extremely valuable. Our marketing team is so amazing. They're scary. I do not work with them except when I need updated branding for my survey. So I don't work with them directly. In terms of influencing business strategy, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, JetBlue is very data-based. Leaders want to understand what to do about the culture based on data, especially data from their very own crew members who are kind of living the culture and also creating it at the same time every day in their jobs. So for example, right now I'm working with, JetBlue has a diversity and inclusion team in the people department. So I'm working with them, one, to get their expertise on how we can better measure diversity and inclusion in JetBlue, and then further to kind of add some aspects to the survey that will allow us to better serve all the different populations at JetBlue. So specifically right now we're focused on lesbian, gay, bisexual. Hopefully gender identity will make its way in there as well. It's definitely a sensitive thing to collect data around regardless, but especially at work. So I'm partnering with them to kind of drive some strategy around, how can we make sure that, regardless of your background or how you identify, that you're still able to fully experience the wonderful culture that we have at JetBlue, that you feel safe in your work group, that you feel like you can be yourself.
So I'll ask my own quick question and then we'll bounce back to online. So Laura, how many of the people in the room, I'm just curious, work? Or you spend a lot of your time at work. Okay, so it's a good chunk of people here. And I would include myself, and I think all of us at SPS would also say that we fall into that category. So usually there are similar themes that people struggle with or that pop up. Can you talk about some of the things that you've seen, maybe themes that you've seen across maybe many places that you've worked or places you've consulted that rise as challenges for that particular business or company, and then what a business might do to make things work a little bit better?
Sure. So there's a lot of things. Gosh, I could talk about so much in that arena. I'm trying to think of one of the more interesting examples in my career. So I don't know if this exactly goes to your question, but this is an interesting project that I worked on when I was doing consulting. So I can't give a ton of detail because I have a non-disclosure agreement, but I was doing some work for Facebook trying to understand ultimately, what motivates their employees. So I don't know if you guys have heard these debates around, well, what motivates millennials in the workplace is different than baby boomers or Generation X. It's not. Hint, hint. People want the same things out of work. They want a good manager. They want to be rewarded and recognized in appropriate ways. They want to work on a strong team. They want to believe in the vision of the company, that senior leaders are taking you in the right direction and not, sending the company into bankruptcy. The way that these things are expressed, the way that these things are carried out, I mean, that's what culture is. And so you have to understand within your industry, within your company based on its history. So JetBlue is not that old. We're only founded in 2000, so we're a very young airline. We are right now thinking of ourselves as teenagers with the requisite growing pains. So right now we're growing super, super fast. The way that, and I can say this to my boss more than she wants to hear it, the way that the company is growing, our small team of 3 people will not be able to support even 10,000 more employees doing things the way that we do them. Measuring engagement, understanding what those key drivers are of engagement and intent to stay at a company, they can change. So if you think about 2008 when the recession hit, engagement wasn't at the top of people's minds. Keeping their job and not getting laid off was. So, you think about how different a company's focus is going to be during a time like that versus a time now when a lot of companies have bounced back. Talent feels a lot safer jumping to a better opportunity. So, retention risks have gotten high again. So, I think that's the tough thing about working in an industry like this where you're thinking about culture and what's driving employee performance, because it's a moving target. And as we change kind of the way we work, so the rise of telecommuting, be able to work from home. 10 years ago, that wasn't a thing. Now it's almost something that people expect when they go to a job, that they'll be able to telecommute. So understanding those trends and, being able to have sight on everything that we need to measure in order to fully understand what makes a crew member engaged, what makes them satisfied with their job and makes them want to stay at JetBlue. We have to constantly be rethinking that, thinking about that, what else do we need to include, and, how can we do a more rigorous job of measuring all those things well so that we're making robust predictions.
So someone online wanted to know what your day-to-day kind of looks like for you, not just at JetBlue, but how you balance work and school.
Well,
and teaching.
I drink a lot of wine. That helps. It's hard. I mean, there's definitely days where I'm 31. Pulling the all-nighters isn't really something I can do anymore. But I work most weekends, I would say. I would not recommend to anyone the working and schooling lifestyle. But it's one of those things that I really want both, so I'm doing both. But yeah, it's definitely difficult. Even Carla has known, she's gotten emails from me, oh my gosh, this just happened, I don't know if I can teach this semester. She's always so supportive. So yeah, it's definitely, it's a lot. So I would say most mornings I wake up and I take care of my non-work related emails. So that can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what I have to respond to. I have a dog, so I walk him. Then I go to work. And depending on the phase that we're in terms of, our year, it depends. So right now, I'm really checking in with work groups, kind of left and right, making sure they have everything they need to put together their action plan. So I'm really just chatting it up with a lot of people. I kind of walk around, call people, check in with them, make sure that they have everything that they need. And we're also, we're doing a lot of reporting. So we're actually trying to get Q1 reports out this week. So it's been a little bit busy trying to get that done, putting out fires, making sure everything looks right. Obviously, we need to make sure that all the data that we put out is 100% correct. So it's a little bit of pressure to be under, to do things quickly, but also high quality. So that's kind of what we're doing now. In October, I was traveling every week. I was going somewhere new to the point where I didn't even know what day it was. January, I had meetings, multiple meetings every single day because, like I said, we meet with every work group across the organization. That takes some time. So it's still a lot of variety. It changes, and kind of what we're doing. We're always kind of supporting one phase of the project while also kind of gearing up for whatever the next phase is. And then I come home and I do more work, and then I do work on the weekends. So I work a lot. So yeah, that's the lifestyle.
Other questions in the room? So we're going to be winding down right now. We'll take one last question in the room, and then I think we have one more maybe online. Yeah, and then we'll say our goodbyes and also give those people who are in the room an opportunity to stay and chat afterward.
So since you're finishing up your PhD, where do you see yourself in the next 5 or 10 years? And do you think JetBlue is where you want to be? You want to go back to consulting?
I love that question, and it's one of my favorite things to think about, especially as I stand here, and this was a fun exercise for me, kind of reflecting on my career. If you had said to Laura in 2012, by the way, this is going to be your life in 5 years, it's going to be pretty sweet, I would never have believed you. I would have been like, absolutely not, I don't want to do that. And I think I kind of can say that for any point in my life. If I kind of went back 5 years, I would never have guessed that this is where I'd be. And I find that really fun and exciting. So I love JetBlue. If it works out, great. But I would say ultimately, I hope I'm not at JetBlue in 5 years. I hope I've moved on to the next thing, whatever it is.
So the last question online is really kind of a three-parter. I think one of the questions I'll tackle separately with that person, which is a little bit separate from what we're talking about here. But the other part is about your process of applying to an IO PhD program, right? Yes. So in the process of they're in the process of applying to an IO degree, and they want to know sort of what kinds of things they should be looking for. So do you have any advice, or maybe you can talk a little bit about what kinds of things you looked for in a graduate program?
Sure. So I will pass on the sage advice I got, which is apply to a lot of places. It's about a year-long process from what I remember, and it's a lot of work. And you never know what kind of options you'll end up with. So I think it's worth applying to a number of places, knowing that applications do take a lot of work. Obviously, tailor each application to the school. I know it sounds annoying, but you got to do it. You want something that's going to make you stand out. Be honest. I really have always found that, while I will say I've been burned for being honest, especially in the corporate world, it's not always the best methodology. I found that ultimately when I've been honest, even when I've been rejected from something, I've found that later on I'm kind of glad that I didn't get that because it wouldn't have been a good fit, right? And that's a hard thing, I think, to think about when you just want a job or you just want this job. But I think the more that you can be honest about what your goals are, what your interests are, what your skills are, the better you'll be once you end up somewhere. The other thing that I didn't realize the value of this until I was in graduate school, but especially if you're doing PhD programs, funding is a huge issue. Any funding guarantees, get them in writing. Part of the reason I didn't go to school in Canada was because they could not guarantee that in writing. And Baruch did, which I'm glad, because Baruch actually did still try to take my funding away prematurely, and the only reason I kept it was because I had it in writing that they had guaranteed it to me. So that's a huge thing, and the thing is, while you may not think you care what the size of the stipend is, you still have to live as a person, so you do need money. And for me in Canada, it wasn't like I could just go out and get a job either, so it would have been a really tough situation. So looking back, I'm glad I, was pretty intense about that, per my advisor's advice. And then the final thing is make sure that grad school is what you want to do. Whether you're doing a master's, which is typically a pretty sizable financial investment, even at CUNY, or you're doing a PhD, which is, even if it's not a financial investment, it's certainly time-wise a huge one. Make sure it's what you want to do. There's been so many times on my PhD that I really wanted to quit or give up, and I just think back to those 2 years I spent knowing for sure that this was the path I wanted to take, and that's really helped through kind of some of the harder times when it felt a little bit hopeless. And even now, you know, there's days where I'm like, oh God, I'm never going to graduate. It's never going to happen. You just keep going and realize that, you know, I put a lot of thought into this decision, and I know it was the right one, even when sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
So on that note, I will say that, you know, we hope that you've enjoyed hearing about Laura's job, so we will thank her for coming out.
Thank you.
I thank you guys for coming out again in this, you know, cold weather. I thank all of the people online for taking the time to hear what Laura had to say. And if you want to learn a little bit more about our program, our master's program here, part of our job is really, it doesn't start when you apply. It really starts when you first contact us. If you want information, if you need a little bit of guidance, you're trying to figure out which programs to apply to. I know it sounds a little self-serving to say, no, come to us, we'll really help you, but there have been times where students have come to me and said, I want to do this in the future, and I say, this isn't the place for you. SPS is not the program for you. You need to go to John Jay, and you want to talk to this person, and they're going to get you that mental health counseling degree, which is what you need to do what you want to do. So our programs are really targeted toward people who want to go into some aspect of developmental psych or some aspect of IO psych. And if you want to talk to us about what you're thinking about doing in the future, and you want to get some input, or you have decided that maybe a developmental or an IO track is what you want to do, or for those students who are already in our program who are listening right now who are master students, they already know that myself as the director of the program and Ayanna Peoples as the assistant director, we're always open. You know, our door is open. You can always email us. You can always call us. Our information is online on our webpage. We also have some information in flyers outside the door about our program. And, you know, please contact us and let us know what you have questions about. And if you want to stick around and ask Laura more questions, or you want to talk to myself or Ayanna, you're more than welcome to do so. Otherwise, you know, we hope you have a great day. And please join us for the next one if you're interested, which is going to be a day in the life of a developmental psychologist, and that's going to be happening in May. And I should probably mention, if you want to learn more about the master's program in general, for those of you who are here who are not in our program already, we do have an online info session webinar tomorrow at noon, and you can learn more about that on our webpage as well. Okay? Well, have a great night. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming, everyone.